background drawings in Photoshop to get them to be smaller resolution, and so the file sizes are smaller, and just to correct things like the proportions, cropping, and kind of brightness and contrast. So here I have Photoshop open. I'm going to use just a photograph I have here of this basket, and I'm just going to drag it in into Photoshop, and you could also go File, Open, and navigate to where you've saved that file. So the first thing to do in Photoshop, I like to make sure, just so you guys are aware, I'm using, if you go to Window and you go to Workspace, I'm using the kind of layout called Essentials. And so if you're missing some of the toolbars and like kind of your layout looks different, go ahead and go and look for that under Window, Workspace, and click on Essentials. I also have Layers on, Properties on, Options and Tools down here. So that's all the kind of menus that I'm using right here. So what I want to do first is just check on the size of my image. So you can see up here I have this ruler that kind of shows me in some units how large my image is. If I right click on it, I can see what those units are or change them. So I'm in inches right now. So I can kind of see that my photograph is about 42 inches wide by like 50, what is that? About 56 inches tall, which is huge, right? It's really big. It's a lot bigger than I need it to be. So what I want to do is change the image size first of all. So in order to do that, before I get to that, you can turn the ruler on and off by going to View, Rulers right here, or hitting Control R. That's just a good reference to have for how large something is. So what I want to do next is I'll go to Image, and under Image I have two options here. One's called Image Size, and one is called Canvas Size. And Canvas Size is going to like basically crop my, it'll crop the boundary of my workspace, but it won't necessarily change the size or resolution of my image, whereas Image Size will do both. So what I want to do is select Image Size. And then here under Image Size, you can see we have an image that's 42 by 56 inches. And the resolution in pixels per inch is 72. Now, generally speaking, so basically resolution literally means how many pixels there are per inch in each direction in a photograph. Now, because my photograph is so huge, this seems pretty low actually. But there's actually a ton of pixels in my image. So if I click here and change to pixels, you can see that my image is about 3,000 by 4,000 pixels. And depending on how large I want that to be on my page in my final presentation, that's way bigger than I need it to be. So I'll go back to inches here. What I generally will do is just change this to 300. So 300 is a good resolution to use often for digital media. It is, you can go larger if you want kind of a little bit more quality. You can also go smaller if you want your file sizes to be smaller. But that's a pretty good number to use for digital media. And so we're going to stick with that. Now that we've set our resolution, we're going to go ahead and change the size of the image in inches. And I know that my final presentation board is about 11 by 17. So if I change this to 17, and because this little lock sign here is already selected, it's going to change the width and height proportionally. So actually what I want to do here is change the height to 11 inches, sorry. Okay, and so now you can see if I click OK, not a lot changed. It looks like I zoomed out a little bit, but you'll notice at the top, now that's about 8 something inches by 11 inches. And if I zoom in, so in Photoshop, you hold Alt on the keyboard and scroll. And the one that I like to use is Control Space. Left click and drag in and out for zooming. You can hold the space bar to pan. Pan only works when you're zoomed in, so when I'm out here, I can't pan because my image is already centered. And you can also use like toolbars to do things like zoom and stuff like that. So I could use the zoom tool and zoom in and out here. But just the hotkey, I like to use Control Space. Okay, so if I zoom in here, you can see we still have plenty of resolution. This image has a lot of quality, but we can still see plenty of detail. So, but also if I go back to image, I don't know if I pointed this out. So now it says my image size is 23 megabytes, which is still quite large. But yeah, if I look at the dimensions here, it's quite a bit smaller, maybe about half or 2/3 of what it was. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is show you guys kind of how to crop and fit an image. So, if you're using Adobe Scan, you'll notice that it kind of frames where it thinks the page is or the image is, or the document is that it's scanning when it takes a photograph. But, if we don't want to kind of use all the settings that Adobe Scan comes with, we can just take a photograph and kind of fix it up ourselves. So the first thing to do will be to kind of transform the image so that it has the kind of undo some of the perspective distortion that we don't want. So over here on the right-hand side of my layers panel, you can see that my image right now is set to something called background, and there's a little lock symbol. Basically, that means I can't move it. So you'll see when I clicked and dragged with the move tool right there, it said it's background. You can't move background. It's locked. It's not editable, really. So what I want to do is release the background, and all I have to do is double click on it. It'll ask me what I want to name that layer, and I'll just click OK. And so now it's a kind of editable layer, and I can move it around. I can do whatever I want to with it. So what I want to do next here is transform it. So up here on the left-hand side, I can use the rectangle tool, and I can right-click. I have my one layer selected, and click Free Transform. The transform allows me to resize an image relative to the canvas size. And once I'm in Free Transform, I can right-click, and I can go to Distort. There's a bunch of different ones here. You can play around with them. But Distort is kind of the most flexible for what I want to do. And then I can kind of stretch the image on one side relative to the other. I'll drag this up to kind of make it more circular. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And I can press Enter. If you are using, if you're trying to make a photograph of a drawing that you took look square or something like that, you can also use guides. So with the ruler tool, we can click and drag from the ruler tool, and we can set guides at different. It'll tell us what dimension it's set at and stuff like that. And we can kind of, when we free transform, we can try and align our free transform to those guides if we're trying to make it look square or something like that. So I'm not doing that, so I'm not going to need these guides. To get rid of them, you just drag them back to the ruler. There we go. Okay, so now we've got the kind of distortion fixed up, and we want to crop the image. So like I said before, if I go to Image, Canvas Size, I could resize the canvas here. If I wanted it to remain proportional, for example, I can go to 8.25 and click OK. It's saying it will clip some of the image. That's fine. Click Proceed. And so you'll see that even though my image is clipped, it hasn't actually deleted the image. So that's one way to kind of crop your image and make sure it stays the size that you want. The other thing you can do is just use the crop tool, which is common. And again, up here, I could actually enter a size that I want. What's nice about this is it shows me where my kind of overall image is. So I think, yeah, you could enter up here, the dimensions you want for your crop boundary to be. You could set a ratio. So I can lock my ratio into square. So no matter what I do, I have a square image there. Okay. And then I'll press Enter to set it. Okay, and then if I go back to the Move tool, now it has actually deleted the outline of my image. So kind of a trade-off there, but that's about all we needed to do. Okay, so now we have our kind of our image resized. We have the proportions, the boundary set up properly, and we have the kind of perspective distortion fixed up. what we want to do next is edit for color. So even with like a full tonal drawing, I would recommend you kind of edit and turn it black and white and make it like good, like play with the contrast, make sure the balance between light and dark is good. So over here on the right hand side, again in my layers panel, I can select this little circle with a black and white in it, and I can create what are called adjustment layers. So this is the same thing for those of you who may know Photoshop. I can also go to image adjustments, and these are all the same tools that I have over here, all the same ones, except that when I make one in the layers panel, it remains editable. And what I mean by that is I'll select one. So just so you guys know, this is kind of right in here, this section here. These are the ones that kind of deal with brightness and contrast, all 4 of these options right here. I'm going to go ahead and select levels. And levels is pretty nice. It allows me to set the upper and lower kind of limits of the brightness and contrast of my image. So that's how I adjust for contrast. Sorry, I meant to make a black and white layer first. So I could click here again and click black and white. Okay, and then with black and white, you'll see here that we can kind of adjust for different color tones, making certain color tones lighter or darker in our image. Some you'll see, since my original image didn't really have a whole lot of blues or greens, well, there's some greens in there, but not a whole lot of blues. That doesn't really do much, but you can see like the greens do a little bit. It's kind of in the coiling there, and the yellow and red really does the most. But anyway, so you can leave this stuff really pretty much kind of default, and just again, what I would do is pay attention to whether or not you have a good range of color of black and white tones. So you don't want anything to be too bright that you lose detail, or too dark that you lose detail. Okay, so then I can go back to adjusting my levels. So once again, with levels, I can adjust the maximum dark value, like the darkest part of the image and the lightest part of the image, kind of the scale between dark and light. And then I can adjust sort of what the values are in between those 2 ends of the spectrum. And so if I kind of mess with these sliders here, so that's a little too much. I'll zoom in here so I can kind of see them more clearly. So what I really want to get here, and I can toggle this on and off to see what I'm changing, but what I really want to get here is kind of more depth, more detail. I want to see the texture a little bit more clearly. I want to see the differences between light and dark tones more, but I don't want to lose any detail by making things too dark or too bright. So that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to just leave it right there. Okay. Oh, and you'll notice once again the order that these are also affects the kind of the way that it changes your image. And I just want to point out that like adjustments in your layers panel is better than doing it up here, because you'll see that like if I go like this. Oh, sorry, I have the wrong layer selected, so it's not really showing anything. If I select the image, go to image adjustments, brightness, contrast. So you can see that if I were to crank this up and click OK, now that's the image that I have, right? So I've lost some amount of detail and information because that's just been applied to my image, and I can go back, but only so far. Like I can go undo, but I can't kind of retain the editability of that function. So now that I have the kind of color balance where I want it, the other thing I wanted to show you guys is just how to kind of crop to an object, if that's something that you want to do. So the other thing that I'll do here is I'll go back and select my original image, and then I'll go up here on my left-hand side, do the quick selection tool. I'll left click and hold, and you'll see for each one of these buttons, if it has that little arrow in the corner, there's actually a whole bunch of buttons underneath. So if you click and hold, you can see all the buttons. You may be familiar with the Magic Wand tool that helps you kind of like select things. just by clicking and dragging where you want to. But there's also this kind of similar tool called the Quick Selection tool, which is really, really helpful when you want to like select certain regions of an image and not others. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click and drag, and you'll see as I go, it'll kind of automatically select regions of my image based on where I kind of drag my cursor through. Okay. And so you can see, because there's a little marching ant line around the basket and around the outside, that I've selected kind of the floor, that part of the image. And if I zoom in here, you can see I've also selected a little bit of my basket that I actually don't want to have selected, right? So what I want to do is now edit my selection to remove that stuff. So up here, you can go add to my selection, remove from my selection. You can also hold Alt on the keyboard and just go in here and click and drag the same way as when you selected. And that'll kind of like deselect stuff. So we'll go through and just kind of fix our selection here. And you can tell, so my little cursor guy looks like a circle with a plus in it. And when I hold Alt, it looks like a circle with a minus in it. So that just indicates that we're either selecting or deselecting. Okay, so that looks pretty good in terms of the outline. I wouldn't worry about being too kind of overly precise about it. It's not going to make a ton of difference. So just kind of go ahead and use that selection. So what I'm going to do now, again, I'll do it in my layers panel because I don't want to, remove information from my image and then not be able to get it back, or not be able to go back to what I had before. So what I'm going to do in the layers panel is I'm going to select this little rectangle with a circle in it, and I'm going to add something called a layer mask. And the layer mask, you'll see another little layer popped up next to the original image, and that represents the visibility of that layer. So basically, if I look at that, you can see there's kind of a big white space with a black circle in it. So anything on this layer mask that's white is visible in my image. Anything on this layer mask that's black is invisible. And anything in between is like translucent, transparent, opaque, etc. So gray tones work on here, but basically this is like, black and white or gray tone only. So what I can do, if I hold Alt on the keyboard, I can click and go to the actual layer. So now you can see I'm on that layer and I'm looking at what the values are on this layer. So I can draw on this layer, I can paint on this layer, I can, I could use the paintbrush here, set it to black, and I could, add information to this layer. I won't do that. Or I can go to Image, Adjustments, Invert. So because what I actually want to do is show the basket and hide the background, I'm just going to invert what's black and what's white. So I'll go back to the layer, hold Alt and left click on it again, and you can see there's my image of my basket without the floor. So the other thing, just to give you a kind of point of reference here, so if I'm using the paintbrush tool to kind of edit my transparency mask and clean up some of the edges between things, so I can draw on this layer in black, and that'll make, wherever I draw, it'll make it disappear. And over here on my swatches, I can switch to white, and then wherever I draw, the image will reappear. So this is a way of like editing what part of a layer is visible, but not like actually deleting it, right? Not erasing it, just changing what parts are visible. That makes sense. And so I can use X on the keyboard to quick swap between these two. That's really good. A kind of quick way to go back and forth. And I can click, hold Shift, and click somewhere else to automatically create a straight line. So like click, Shift, click, hold Shift and click again, and you can make a straight line there with the paintbrush tool. And if I hold Alt on the keyboard, right click and drag I can size my paintbrush up. I can size my paintbrush down. So I'm dragging left and right to make it bigger or smaller. And I can drag it up and down to change what's called the hardness. And so the hardness will make it have like a soft edge. So you can see there, that'll kind of blend the edges, make it like kind of semi-translucent. So we could go around and do that if we wanted to. I'm not too worried about that. And of course, so I should point out that won't work. Well, I guess that's not true. But some people, for whatever reason, and I can't remember what it is right now, won't be able to do this. So you can also just go up here with the paintbrush tool selected, and you can drag these sliders to change the size and the hardness. Just like that. Okay, so there we have it. There's our image. Now, the other thing I could do, so right now I could save this image out, and I could do one of two things. I could save it as a JPEG, and a JPEG will automatically what's called flatten my image. So if I go to File, Save As, and I go to Save As Type, and I change to JPEG, so I'll rename this so I don't overwrite my original photograph. So I'll call it my edit and hit save. So in here I have a couple options. I want to maintain as much quality as I can. I'll click OK. And then when I go to the folder and look at that image, it just looks like it's white, and the image is the image. And also, if I were to open this image in Photoshop, I can just drag it in there. You can see it doesn't have any of the layers that that I have in this file. So when I save something as a JPEG, it flattens the image. It like removes the layers and all the information of how I've edited the image. So every time I do this kind of process, I also want to save a PSD file, which is a Photoshop file. And that will retain the layers and all the kind of editing that I've done here. So if I go to Save As, and see by default, it'll want me to save it as a Photoshop file. And then I'll go ahead and click Save. Click OK. And then, every time I close and open this Photoshop file, I'll have all my layers and I'll be able to adjust still. The other thing that I can do from here is I can save my image. I'll go to File, Save As a file type called a PNG. So down here, there's this .png file. And a .png file actually allows us to save transparency within our image. So I'll click Save. That's fine. Click OK. And now I have this JPEG in here, and I also have this PNG in here. Now you can't tell the difference yet. I mean, you can kind of tell because that's white and it shows blue there. But basically, this will allow me to place this in a document, and like this part of the image that I don't have any information in Photoshop will be totally transparent. So I can put stuff behind it, in front of it, etc. So I'll show you what I mean by that when we get to the InDesign portion. The other thing I wanted to point out here is if I wanted to show the background, but edit it separately, I can do that as well. So I'm going to click on this whole layer, right-click, and hit Duplicate Layer. There we go. Ask me what I want to name it as. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually apply. So I go to my layer mask, right-click, and hit Delete Layer Mask. Okay, so now I'm showing the floor background part of my image. Then I'll go to Adjustments, go to Levels, and I can adjust, because my level is just above that one layer and it's not above this layer. Like in layers in Photoshop, everything is like kind of affected downstream. So basically the black and white is affecting everything. The levels is affecting this image, and this levels is affecting just that image. So there's a kind of hierarchy to what things affect. So if I play around with this, I can get my floor to be a lot lighter. And I can even make it almost kind of fade away if I want to. Kind of like that. Okay. what's happening here is the levels that's above is still affecting both those layers. So I can actually, if I don't want that to happen, I can hold Alt on the keyboard and I can click. See that little cursor show up with the square and then the arrow. I can click between the layers. So now that levels is only affecting that one layer, nothing else. And so now I need to adjust this a little bit more. Okay, there we go. And then I could save this as a JPEG. There'd be no reason to save it as a PNG because it doesn't have a transparent background. So I'll go ahead and do that. Again, save it as a JPEG. Call this one my background. Save. Okay. Okay, and then I'll file save to save the PSD, the Photoshop file. All right, and that will be the conclusion of this tutorial. And so in the next video, I'll show you how to set up an InDesign document and lay out images and add text and other information. Okay.